What's up, everyone? Welcome to episode 134 of the Noizze Podcast, part of the Noizze Podcast Network, and sponsored by Satanic Co. I'm your host, that's your boy, Kris Pugh, and as ever, I'm joined by my very good friend and Mr. Cynical himself, Samuel Lewis. Mate, on this hot, horrendous Thursday evening, how are we?
I'm sick of reading "This is the hottest day of the year" until tomorrow, when that becomes the hottest day of the year, and then the next one does. Like,
It's wild, yeah.
when is this? When is this going to end, man? Like, I am
Honestly,
sick of it.
is there anything more classically British than it raining for 6 weeks and then being blistering and giving us blistering heat for the first week of September when everyone's got to wear suits again? Come on, dude.
Yeah, welcome
Did it
back to
have to
school.
happen?
It's 32 degrees. We don't have aircon in our classroom, so just opening the windows and just dealing with it. It is horrendous.
It's pretty rough, man. Yeah, and it's like, and we're not a country that's like widely invested in aircon, because if you think about, like, if you're a business and you open up, like, me and you open up like a store, we're not going to spend £14,000 on aircon when it's warm for like 3 weeks of the year. But
Yeah,
when it's warm for 3 weeks of the year, you really wish there was aircon, right?
absolutely. And you go to like holidays and hotels in like Spain and Portugal and those kind of places, and there's aircon everywhere, and it's amazing. It's just really sad, really, really sad state of affairs. But yeah, lots of fun to discuss. Upcoming on the podcast, at least, though.
Yeah, to cool us down, let's talk about one album that I think will rive you intensely, another album that will excite you intensely. So let's see how that goes. We're a rock and metal podcast. We come to you every fortnight. The best way to support us is by subscribing on YouTube / liking or following, depending on whichever podcast service you use. We're available on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, basically anywhere you get a podcast. Me and Sam will be there. We're sponsored by Satanic Co, a superb coffee / tea / metal band and brand. More about those in our description. On today's episode, we are going to discuss new records from Corey Taylor and Tesseract. Let's start with Corey Taylor. Oh, just before that, sorry, you can find us on Twitter at Noizze Podcast. Both me and Sam run that account, and you can follow the general Noizze handle on Twitter at Noizze UK. Right, we'll move on, Sam. Let's go on to Tesseract, War of Being, also out on September 15th, this time via K-Scope Records. It's the prog metal band's fifth full-length album and the follow-up to 2018's Sonder. I know I do always kind of say this, Sam, when we review an album that's kind of complex, but I'm just going to repeat that theme here. Really, I think it's best that you take the lead on this in terms of the complexity of the way this album's put together. Because while, of course, I'm going to chime in with my thoughts, I think there's a great chance that you'll be able to explain this record in a better way than I can. One thing I will say, just to start us off, whenever Periphery release an album, I just take it as a given that's going to be my favourite prog record of the year. And not that I'm kind of neck deep in the happenings of prog on a yearly basis, but I do always check out like the mainstay important records, or try to, that come out in the genre on a given year. And whenever Periphery release, I'm like, that's going to be my prog record of the year. But possibly not this year, Sam.
I can't
Possibly
believe you
not
said
this
that. You've
year.
opened yourself up to 57 YouTube comments being like, "You haven't heard Widdly Diddly Portion 47," and it's like, what do you mean? Like,
You ever heard the
haven't
Dream
heard that?
Theater's Cousins Dogs band? But yeah, dude, I just said,
part 14.
I just said that Periphery, the new Periphery on P5 is not necessarily going to be my prog record of the year. After listening to War of Being, Sam, is Periphery's P5 necessarily going to be your prog record album of the year?
Yeah, it still is. I didn't like this that much.
Right, okay, that's interesting.
I thought it was good, but there were a lot of songs that I felt were kind of meandering. And with Periphery, while the songs are complicated and long and well thought out, as these Tesseract numbers are, there's a difference with Periphery. It always feels in service of this groundswell, this huge moment that it sort of builds up to. And while I like this in parts, Actually, I'm being a bit unfair. I actually really like this in parts, I'll be honest. But there were some parts where I actually came away kind of disappointed. So I want to start with the positives because there are more positives than negatives, but P5 is still my favourite prog record of the year in comparison, really. This opens really well.
Yeah, natural
Really
disaster,
well.
brilliant.
Really strong. Like, but not just because it's heavy and complicated and stabby and the tempos range from time to time and things like that. It's because it builds towards that absolutely humongous chorus at the end, that really open, powerful, really kind of like sort of emblematic kind of immediately iconic kind of chorus at the conclusion of that song. And then it follows it with a song that does the same, but with a much slower sort of transcendental build, with this sort of the idea of Legion, with that beautiful vocals, really top class work for the vocalist all album, by the way. His ability to sort of like cascade in and out of this sort of like reverb centered sort of clean sounds, really, really, really beautiful.
Yeah, Dan Tompkins puts in a performance on this album. He's
Really
superb.
nice,
He's
really,
superb.
really nice. And I like the clean guitar chords of echoes and the way that it sort of rotates behind the vocals and stuff like that, and slowly develops on this sort of picking riff and sort of adds notes and adds layers every single few bars and stuff like that. Where I start getting a little bit annoyed, I say annoyed, a little bit disappointed, is the middle section turns me off a little bit. The explode like Tender, which sound like a band. There was a band called Explosions in the Sky, and they wrote a lot of like it's echoey, ambient, clean guitar music that was used in a lot of film soundtracks and stuff. And it's one of those bands that you wouldn't know the name of, but you've definitely heard at least 2 or 3 of their tunes because they're in the background of film scenes or a Grey's Anatomy episode or something like that. That I found about because they were in like this Friday Night Lights film that I watched. It was brilliant because it's like really ambient. Anyway, it starts off like
Yeah.
this and it slowly builds, really beautiful, bit by bit. Right, that Tender song with the drums just sort of like slowly increasing in pace and tempo
Yeah.
and heaviness.
Can I
And
say
all
that I
sorts
love
of
Tender? I love Tender. I think it's class. Can I just add that in just
Of
while you're
course, of course. And it just got heavy like at the like 30 seconds, it felt like at the end. And I wanted to do that a bit sooner or carry that on a little bit longer. It felt like the moment it got to this climax, it sort of dipped away a little bit quickly. And I found that a little bit disappointing. The 11-minute title track, War of Being, I actually didn't like. Might be the first 11-minute song I've heard in about 3 years that I didn't like. I'll be honest. It because it felt more methodical and mechanical than it did sort of, and I don't just mean the sound of the music, because I want people to be like, that's actually their intention is to kind of sound more computeristic. I know what I mean, like it's mechanical in the songwriting style. It just felt like that riff at the start was kind of like that kind of slow, sluggish after the burial type stuff, and then it kicks into that kind of offbeat, like genty kind of verse, and that continues for what feels like a little bit too long. It kind of meanders for me, and it grows and grows and grows, but it grows into something that I don't necessarily enjoy personally. That spoken word rap section about 2/3 of the way in, that kind of felt like the climax of the song, but for me, it didn't really go anywhere beyond that. It never seemed to get out of third gear, and I found it a little bit underwhelming. And this is the thing about Tesseract on this record, is that I enjoy some of the musicality and the musicianship of this album, and their ability to combine heavy, gent, offbeat sounds with the classic echoey clean and rotate between those two very different dynamics, I think is incredibly impressive. But when you build up the song to something and it doesn't quite get there, regardless of how clever the build-up is, it still feels like a disappointment to me. And there are lots of those songs where it feels like that. Like Sirens. Do you feel a bit empty coming out of Sirens?
well.
Like,
I did
where
want
is
to
this
talk.
going?
I did want to talk about the drumming of Jay Postones
Oh God,
on
he does
Sirens
phenomenal.
because
He
I
does
think he's a
phenomenally on that
beautiful
record.
drummer. I think he's a beautiful
Yes.
drummer.
Yeah, he mixes your traditional metal double kick offbeat style, especially in sort of the prog metal stuff where it's sort of like multiple timings and polyrhythms and stuff. But what he does that I adore, and I've told you this before, over and over again, I love this type of thing where you add the snare and the hi-hats and you don't just do the basic kind of like kick drum stuff over the top. Give me a bit of snare, give me a bit of rolls, give me a bit of like musicality, a bit of syncopation, a bit like where Chris Adler used to do for Lamb of God, where he was doing that
Yeah.
underneath stuff, and then he would still be able to add in accents on the hi-hat and accents on the ride cymbal to make everything sound interesting. Back when Joey Jordison, God rest his soul, used to do it as well for early Slipknot records, and you knew that he was having his little flair. And the drummer on this was doing that beautifully. From that aspect, they set a beautiful foundation for some of these songs. My issue is with the song composition itself. It always seems to be building up in this middle section, something that it never quite gets there. Sirens feels like a missed opportunity because it's beautiful to open. I just wish it ended better. And then you listen to like Sacrifice, the final tune, which does exactly what I wanted. In the set, there's a solid opening refrain, really big chorus, and it combines those transitions and those changes in dynamic with the context of actually an engine running through the song. Too often in this album, I felt like they chose to be clever rather than they chose to be effective. That's what I feel sometimes. And it just feels like they've kind of outsmarted themselves a little bit when it's like, rather than, all right, let's find the chorus that make that the engine of the song, and then we can do everything else around it. Like that's what Periphery do wonderfully. They still find the main motif and they still find a transcendental way to end a song in this really impactful way. And I feel like Tesseract are driving down a road, seeing the sign that says big, massive finish, and then just taking a left turn sometimes. And it just feels like there's a lot of missed opportunities on this record to really hammer things home, despite the fact that I feel at parts it's an incredibly thoughtful, introspective, and reflective album. It's really smart. I just find myself listening to it feeling like I need something else in some of these songs. Maybe, though, to argue with myself, if someone gave me a counter argument and said, look, actually, it's a collected work, and rather than seeing it as 8 individual songs, see it as one big connected idea, in which case the opening and the chorus act as massive bookends for the entire album, then I'm saying fair enough if that's the way I should treat it as a concept record. But as individual songs, there are some weak links on this that let it down slightly. And I think some of the song composition could need a little bit of work, although I think it's an incredibly clever and intelligent record.
I think if you're a prog metal gatekeeper, you are going to adore this album because it gives you ample moments to drop your jaw in respect in terms of the difficulty, the complexity, the time signature changes, the changes of tempo. There really is a lot to be admired in this album. The reason why I've said you know Periphery is not necessarily my prog album of the year as we speak is because I adore the choruses on this album. I think Daniel Tompkins, I know that you've mentioned sometimes there was a chance to do the big finish. He didn't do the big finish, but when they anchor him into the middle of the track in the chorus sections, something special happens a lot of the time. Natural Disaster, just when you feel like that track does everything it could possibly do, it's almost like Between the Buried and Me, like the way Natural Disaster happens, so like rigid and obtuse, and then it goes in these multitude directions. And that's when you think, right, okay, they've gone everywhere they could have gone. Natural Disaster has this big, like, operatic melodious finish with Daniel Tompkins at the center of it. And I was just like, God, this is stunning, this. I really liked Echoes because it was more direct in its opening than Natural Disaster, but I didn't think it was any less impactful. But I'm not sure because I'm not huge on Tesseract in terms I'm not big on the discography. I believe his name is Aisel Kane, I believe is the lead guitarist's name. There's a great chance I said that name wrong though. The tonality fluctuations in the way he writes his guitar, his riffs, absolutely amazing. Echoes doesn't require as much of you as a listener, and sometimes that's what I need in my prog metal records, a couple of tracks that doesn't require intense listening from me, because my musical knowledge and just my musical enjoyment does kind of waver after 5-6 minutes sometimes. But yeah, Echoes is more direct Huge chorus again. I mentioned that I adored Tender. I felt like it was almost unmissable 4.5 minutes for me. I know you mentioned you wanted something more, but I felt like there really was a curtain closing epic that swung through the center of that song that I loved. Sirens. And just so I close off here, Sirens, I was more focused on the drumming of Jay Postones in that track, especially to open. He's got just unbelievable way of fleeting around the kit at literally a moment's notice. There's always like a wild hi-hat or a wild floor tom just thrown in there out of nowhere. Yeah, Animals as Leaders esque almost. Sirens. I really, really enjoyed it. Again, for me, being someone who likes prog but is by no means an expert in prog or someone who pays a huge amount of attention to prog, I really enjoyed this. Like, really, really enjoyed it. I'd probably listen to the Peripheries record again and then this just shortly after to determine which one I think I prefer. But again, if you're a prog metal fan who really likes their musicians to push you to the edge of your understanding and to their possible limits of complexity in terms of writing, I think this has an awful amount on offer for you. And even if you're someone who just likes a great chorus with an emphatic riff behind it, there's also a lot of that on this album as well. So it does cater to a couple of fields. I really like this as a whole, but I can see where you would find some faults in it.
Yeah, I think, like I said, I think it's a very, very good prog metal album. And I agree. If you're a prog metal fan, if you're a Tesseract fan, I can't imagine. We reviewed the last Tesseract album as well, and I can't imagine you could be disappointed with this record. And if you listen to it as a holistic thing, I imagine when some of my criticisms might not even matter at all. I listen to the songs, and I found some ways to be a little bit disappointed because it felt the way that the song was structured, it was building towards a particular moment and an idea, and then it neglected to do that, and it felt a little bit underwhelming at the end. But overall, this is an album of real intelligence, an album of real accomplishment. And if you're a big fan of the gent sound and the math rock style of being able to jump from 4/4 choruses to sort of 6/8 and 7/8 verses and that type of stuff, if that really works for you, then there is a lot of that. The guitar tone here, you're right, is stunning. My favorite elements of it are actually those beautiful clean sounds and those big violent chorus chords that they seem to be able to put at the right moment. I think this is a really, really, really good record within the context of its genre. But if we're talking about where does it compare with Periphery, who I believe are a special band, a really special, spectacular band, then I think there needs to be a little bit more from some of these songs consistently for me. But again, I will cede to anybody else's opinion on that.
I think that's a good place to leave off episode 134 of the Noizze podcast. A reminder that the best way to support us is by subscribing /liking /following, depending on the podcast service that you use, whether that is YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, etc. You can follow us on Twitter at Noizze Podcast, or if you want to follow the general Noizze handle, you can follow us at Noizze UK. A reminder to check out in the description, Satanic Tea Co, a metal band and coffee/tea brand. Don't see that phrase said too often. We're going to be back in approximately 2 weeks' time. I need to double check the release schedule to see what is going to be out in and around that time. But yeah, we'll have another episode out in 14 days there or thereabouts. Thank you so much for listening. Thank you for your support. It means the world to us. We will see you in 2 weeks. Remember to check out Tesseract's War of Being and Corey Taylor's CM2 on the 15th of September. Thanks for listening. We'll see you in 2 weeks. Bye.